Over the course of the past few weeks, I've received several requests for information about the International Megan's Law. Folks are asking me very specific questions about, can a sex offender get a passport? Does a sex offender have to register the passport? Are countries blocking people from entering the country because of the sex offender passport? And I'm getting a whole bunch of questions that I think are very good. I think they're very interesting. And because I think they apply to a much larger audience, I'm going to go ahead and address those questions today. The first question is the most basic and thankfully is the easiest to answer. The question is, can a sex offender legally obtain and possess a passport? And the answer without question is yes. Now, I'm the kind of guy that wants specific answers out of the law. I don't want somebody's opinion. I don't want to hear stories from somebody's great aunt. I want the facts. And the fact is that under 22 United States Code Section 212, there are only two groups of people that are not allowed to have passports. And those are people that have been convicted of trafficking in drugs, and those people who have used their passports to go to another country to commit a sex offense. And they call that sex tourism. In and of itself, that's interesting because yes, a person, an American citizen, can be prosecuted in the United States for committing a sex offense in another country. U.S. law allows for that, but that's not the point here. The point here is, if you have not been convicted of drug trafficking or sex tourism, you absolutely can possess a passport. Now, let me make a quick note that when I say you, I don't know every individual viewer, of course, and I don't know their legal status, but since I'm answering the questions for sex offenders, I'm going to direct my answers to them. So if I use the term you and you're not a convicted sex offender, then forgive me, I'm just being general. So that's a very clear answer for you. Now let's move on to the next question. The next question is a little more detailed. The question is, can a person who is on probation or parole get a passport? And again, the answer is a very clear yes. If you go back and read the section of law that I gave you a moment ago, 22 United States Code Section 212, you're going to find absolutely nothing written in there that prohibits someone on probation or parole from obtaining a passport. Now, I know this for absolute fact because when I obtained my passport, I was still on probation. Never had a problem from my PO, never had a problem from the court, never had a problem from anybody. Nobody cared. And I'm also going to put here a photograph of the application to get a passport, as well as the link to the application. And you're going to see on here that nowhere does it ask you if you've been convicted of a felony. Nowhere does it ask that. So yes, you can have a passport on probation. So yes, you can obtain a passport while you're on probation or parole. There is nothing that stops you from doing that. And I know, speaking from personal experience, that there are a lot of myths going around, especially inside the prison system, that say, oh, convicts can't get passports. That's a lie. Yes, you can. And people who are on probation or parole can't get passports. That's a lie. Yes, you can. Now, let me give you two special warnings, though. The first is that many states, including my home state of Florida, require anyone on the sex offender registry to register their passports with the sheriff's office. Your state may have that requirement as well, so be mindful of that. You don't want to get tripped up like that. And the other caveat is that if you are actively facing criminal charges, if you've been arrested and you're pending trial, if you're out on bond, you don't want to apply for a passport. You don't do that. Chances are pretty good that the State Department knows that you have pending charges, that they do that kind of check, and they will notify the court or the sheriff's office in your county that you have tried to obtain a passport. That's going to look horrible in front of the court because it's going to make it look like you're preparing to flee the country in order to avoid justice. Don't do that. So those are the only caveats I give you. Register your passport if you're on the registry, and don't try to get a passport if you're pending criminal charges. The next question has to do with what these passports look like or what they have to say on the inside, and I'm going to provide that to you right here. Let me show you a quick image. I have been asked if there are any countries that do in fact allow entry of sex offenders into the country on these sex offender passports. I am aware because I've done research, not because I've been to these countries, but I am aware that Japan, the Philippines, Australia, and Canada will not allow sex offenders in. That also is generally true for felons at large, but specifically sex offenders they have a problem with. But as for Europe, I'm here, so obviously they allow people in. Now, I did not come here on a sex offender passport. I came here 1 month before that law went into effect. I came here because that law was about to go into effect. And once I was here in Europe, I did declare myself to the German government as a convicted sex offender. And thus far, the German government has had no issue with me whatsoever. In fact, for reasons that are irrelevant to this video, but I will talk about it in another video, the German government seems to have a great deal of sympathy with my situation. Now, there is a reason that Europe is very uncomfortable with the International Megan's Law, and there is a reason specific to Germany that they are uncomfortable with this law and probably will never enforce it. I will be surprised if they ever actually enforce it. And I'd like to take a moment and explain that history to you because it is extremely important to sex offenders at large. The sex offenders of the United States need to know this history with Germany. So let's take a moment and look at it. Although I really don't enjoy having to explain it, I need to point out to you that in 1936, the German government under the Nazis enacted a law that required Jews to begin carrying special passports. They had to carry identification cards as well, identifying them as Jews. In 1937, the Jews started having to carry special passports that had a large J stamped on the inside. The J stood for Juden, or Jew. At that time, there began to be limits on the number of passports being issued to Jews and just what rights the Jews had with these passports. In 1941, the German government shut off all access to the passports and invalidated those passports. In other words, they restricted the Jews from leaving the country. And very unfortunately, we know what began to happen to the Jews in 1941 after the borders were closed to them. For that reason, the Germans today are extremely sensitive to any form of registry. Any form of registry that logs anybody for their political affiliation, for their gender, for their ethnicity, for their convictions. The Germans are extremely sensitive to that and are opposed to them. For that reason, the German government is extremely uncomfortable with the sex offender registry in the United States because they can see where these laws lead. Now, let me point this out because this really irks me. After Germany was defeated in World War II, the American government rounded up the Nazi leaders and put them on trial in Nuremberg for violating the human rights of Jews. Among those human rights violations were, in fact, the fact that Jews had to carry identification cards, later had to carry passports, and later had their right to leave the country taken away from them. The American government felt that these were such egregious violations in conjunction with the execution of the Jews that the Nazi leaders were executed. So it's ironic that here in the it's ironic that in 2019, I'm having to make a video about how the American government is doing the exact same thing, requiring sex offenders to have identifying markers on their driver's license and to have to carry passports that identify them as sex offenders. There is a real danger here, and many of the governments around the world are well aware of it.